Good morning. Before I start my talk, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank my teachers, Jane Schneider and Peter Schneider, and to say that this talk is just to encourage you in your practice. I also want to acknowledge and thank Greg Fain, who was my teacher for a number of years, in part because this is how he starts his talks, and he said that I could do that too. So thank you to him as well. So I'm pretty sure that everything I'm going to try and say about stories has already been said using the word delusions. But I like the word stories instead of delusions because I'm not knocking this stuff. I think that delusion sometimes has like a sort of a negative connotation, like it's saying like we're crazy. And I mean, maybe it's not there, but for me, it kind of feels that way. And I'm not saying this is, necessarily bad or that we're insane. Just pointing out the unreality of the stuff that our minds come up with and that we, keep adding into. So there are a lot of types of stories. There's obvious ones like flights of fancy or daydreams. I've multiple times during Zazen had entire multi-day exchanges with a neighbor about, for example, many things, but one example is he's got a tree that's growing out into my property and it's messing things up, and the conflict keeps growing and growing until it leads to me taking legal action, or sometimes sort of stealth, or sometimes it results in outright physical violence. That's one example. And it's worth noting, I do not have a neighbor with a tree that grows onto my property. I don't even have any property. That is a story, right? And not just during Zazen, but all the time, just out doing, going about my day, I get these imaginary scenarios, these hypothetical arguments or romances or power fantasies. These are all examples of stories that really resemble stories. They're very obviously a fiction. But there are so many tiny stories throughout my life which are not immediately identifiable as fictions. These are more like speculations or assumptions. Many such stories crop up when I am driving, like, that guy is tailgating me because he wants me to go faster. I could just as easily say that guy has a different comfort level regarding a safe following distance than I do. Sometimes the stories I tell myself are similar to the lies in commercials that the advertisers tell us as if they are true, hoping we take them as such. For example, I could really go for a burger right about now, or I would love to smoke a cigarette. The way that I imagine I will feel if I satisfy desires like these is never the way that I end up feeling, but by that point it's too late and I have fallen for the story I maintained until fulfilling whatever craving I was experiencing. Even experiencing a craving is a story. Even something as simple as I'm hot is a story. I mean that in terms of temperature, not physical attractiveness. Although that would be a good story too. But it even goes deeper than those examples. There are stories that don't even look like speculation or assumptions that I just take for granted. There's stories that look like just the facts of existence, my existence. Some stories that I regard as that way, like, I'm Chris, I'm a gregarious iconoclast, or whatever. Any stories about my life and who I am. There's an episode of Family Guy where the family ends up in a panic room which is slowly filling with water. When they are within inches of being submerged, Peter confesses, "I did not care for the Godfather." And the response from the rest of the family is pretty intense, and Peter explains, "It insists on itself, Lois." it insists on itself. Now, I don't know if that's really fair to say about The Godfather. It's a really entertaining scene, all in all. But point is, I want to say that that's definitely true of our ego, or the stories about who we are that comprise our ego. At theater camp one summer, we arranged 4 chairs at right angles, and then people laid down in an overlapping way, kind of like a Celtic knot, so that each of us had the next one's head and shoulders on our abdomens. So we're all lying down like this with our legs, our feet on the floor, and then our knees, and then, on our abdomens slash lap is the head of the next person, and our head is on the abdomen of the person behind us. Anyway, so we go in like a little circle of 4, right? So then, all at the same time, we push up, and then they take the chairs away, the other people in the workshop take the chairs away, and now we're all just holding each other up, holding this form together without the support of the chairs. We're just reinforcing one another, but anyways, so we're maintaining this form just by holding each other up, right? So the stories that form our ego are like this. They reinforce one another, but ultimately they're not being held up by anything but sheer force of will. I've noticed plenty often that I'm exerting myself in keeping these stories alive. Kind of like when a crowd at a pep rally keeps punching a beach ball up in the air, or like I'm carrying around an armful of plants or stuffed animals or something, and I've mistaken the contents of my arms for reality. But actually, the stuff that I'm carrying is blocking my view of the world around me. Whether we're talking about stories like daydreams with a long, intricate plot about something that will never happen, or desires, or complaints, or our limited identity, Zen practice demands that we drop all of them. Now, without fail, as soon as a teacher starts talking about getting rid of my delusions or dropping my stories, I react with, "But we need our stories to live in this world," or some variation on that. I think this is my ego feeling threatened and responding defensively. It's my ego insisting on itself. Actually, I'm the one doing the insisting. I'm protecting my experience. There's a deep fear motivating this effort to hold up our stories, that if we were to relax and let them go, that we would cease to exist. I would go further and say that we are afraid we don't exist already. And so we hold on to our stories to comfort ourselves. That's also why even negative emotions like anger feel so good. They placate the fear that we don't exist. How could we not exist? If I didn't exist, then how could I be experiencing such a strong feeling? If the rock is empty, then how come my toe hurts when I kick it? I think that's also in part why it's so frustrating if we find ourselves with another person and realizing that their story about who we are doesn't match up with our story of who we are. And yes, it's impossible to live without stories. Stories are how we know things, concepts, right? I always go to the example of, using math to do engineering and make planes fly. Those are stories. And actually, in a practice discussion with Linda Gallion one time at Tassajara, she said, Buddhism, yes, even Buddhism is a story, but it's a helpful story, okay? Knowledge and stories like this are useful for navigating the world of forms. Dropping our stories doesn't mean complete annihilation of them. It just means changing how we relate to them. Zen is not asking the impossible. Zen just asks us to quit preferring our stories so much, to quit putting so much effort into maintaining them. Zen makes a practice of just letting go of whatever stories are popping up moment after moment. Because unless we need a particular story in a particular situation, they just kind of drive a wedge between our actual life in the here and now and our experiencing that life. This aspect of Zen practice is really important and easy to miss. I think that's why I love the 2 koans from the Book of Serenity, Just This Is It, and not knowing is most intimate. So I'm going to close with a couple of passages regarding those that inspire me. So this is from Clear. So the actual case 49 in the Book of Serenity is about like a story where this anecdote gets recalled. So what I'm about to read is actually from the commentary, from Cleary's commentary on case 49, when he actually tells the story that the pertinent story that they reference in the actual case. When Dongshan took leave of Yunyan, Dongshan asked, "After your death, if someone asks me if I can describe your reality, how shall I reply?" After a while, Yunyan said, "Just this is it." Dongshan sank into thought. Yunyan said, "You are in charge of this great matter. You must be thoroughgoing." Dongshan left without saying anything more. Later, as he was crossing a river, he saw his reflection, and then for the first time was thoroughly enlightened. Thereupon he composed a verse. "Just don't seek from others, or you'll be far estranged from self. I now go on alone. Everywhere I meet it. It now is me. I now am not it. One must understand in this way to merge with thusness." When Dongshan was in the community setting offerings before the image of Yunyan, he retold the foregoing story about describing the reality of Yunyan. Then a monk asked, "When Yunyan said, 'Just this is it,' what did he mean?" Dongshan said, "At that time I nearly misunderstood what my late teacher meant." The monk said, "Did Yunyan know it is or not?" Dongshan said, "If he didn't know it is, how could he be able to say so? If he did know it is, how could he be willing to say so?" Not being a scholar of Chinese, I arrogantly attempted to translate Dongshan's poem in a way that made more sense. Here is that attempt. "Avoid seeking anywhere else, for that's far from the self. Now I travel alone and I meet it everywhere. Now it's just me. I'm not it. This is the way to understand merging with thusness." Traveling completely alone includes not maintaining our habitual stories. Devoid of our stories, we meet our true self everywhere, in everyone and everything. And this is actually just about as not alone as we can be. So there's two translations of the Book of Serenity that I was able to find. One is Cleary, and the other is Gary Shishin-Wick. So Cleary's translation of Case 20 goes like this. And I took out the little interjections that the original monk who compiled the Book of Serenity, Wansong, sort of stuck in between each line. They're kind of distracting. Anywho, so this is Case 20. Dizong asked Fayan, "Where are you going?" Fayan said, "Around on pilgrimage." Dizong said, "What is the purpose of pilgrimage?" Fayan said, "I don't know." Dizong said, "Not knowing is nearest." In the Wick translation, he translates that as most intimate. So the final response is, "Not knowing is most intimate." And that knowing, in part, I think touches on stories. So having no stories is how we have no knowing. And without that knowing, we're most intimately experiencing, I guess you could say, life. This is a section of Wick's commentary on Case 20. "I don't know" could also be translated "not knowing." Not knowing is most intimate. As soon as we know something, it becomes separate. It becomes a piece of knowledge or understanding that we can manipulate. That doesn't mean it's not useful, but it's just not very intimate. Not knowing is most intimate, Yet we've developed all kinds of patterns and habits that prevent us from being intimate with ourselves and with others. In order to be free of them, we have to begin to see them, to cultivate awareness that transcends thoughts and knowledge. To expand the context of your life, you must experience your own discomfort and misery. Just notice how protective you are of whatever it is you think you are. Master Jizo said, in walking and sitting, just hold to the moment before thoughts arise. Look into it, and you'll see not seeing. Then put it to one side. So, let us practice noticing the many stories that come up, noticing how we grab a hold of those stories and keep them alive, and therefore let us cultivate having this chance to relax and let them go. Thank you for your kind attention. Please take very good care of yourselves. And so now, if you've got some stories you wanted to share, or if there's something that didn't make sense, I'll give it a shot at saying it some other way. John.
I just wanted to say, great talk. I really like the way that you made that differentiation and yet the correlation between things that we know in our heads to be just daydreaming, things we're making up, and yet these other things that we so believe to be true, and yet it's not. It's kind of like when you go to the movies and you go to Star Wars. Well, clearly this is, you're looking at it in a way that it's clearly, it's made up and so forth. But then what happens when you go to a documentary or a movie or a show that says it's based on real life? Suddenly you have this belief that everything around this story is real, but it's not. It involves the thoughts and the feelings and the perceptions of other individuals, or maybe a story based in real life is just that, based on it, but none of the rest of it is true. And I love that part, because I really do think that we trick ourselves like that all the time. Like, we think we know what's not real and what's real, and we try and differentiate between what's real and what's not real. So I really like that part. Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I've found really helpful, that I sort of, in a way, stumbled upon with, I'm sure lots of nudging from various teachers and talks I've listened to over the years, is that my ideas of who I am are much closer to this imaginary fight with an imaginary neighbor than they are to reality. And that sort of progression of like going from obvious stories to less obvious stories is, yeah, I'm really glad that you liked that, because it's something that I noticed that I wanted to share. Sandy has her hand up.
Thank you for your talk. I really liked it, and it brought many things up. I wanted to say that, well, ever since my husband has died, I haven't been plagued that much in the past by stories. I seem to be able to let them go, and um, other ones just appear and just look at them and I let them go. But recently, I find, especially in the evening, um, I'm sitting in my den and in the evening, and I have a 9-foot glass door, and the blinds that were on it broke. So people walking by the front of my house, even though there's a wall, they can see over and see into my den and my kitchen. And I start getting these stories coming up about fears. You know, somebody's going to break in because they look in my house and see something they want, or they know I'm vulnerable because I'm the only person here. And those stories are pretty strong ones, and they really tend to grip me. But then the other night, I realized that if I don't let go of these stories, uh, that I have to let go of these stories, because if I don't, we create our own universe, and I don't want to um, bring these feelings and bring the feeling of being in danger into my life. I want to feel secure when I go out and comfortable when I go out, and for most part, I am. So I realize that I have to get rid of these, let them go. This type of story. And if I'm going to listen to a story, it needs to be a lot more pleasant. And, something I can take and go to bed with and have sweet dreams afterwards. So thank you for bringing all this up, because, it's something that's ongoing, of course. And anyone practicing Buddhism uh, begins to see the stories and begins to learn, what's based in reality and what isn't. So thank you, Chris. I really appreciate it. Okay.
Spencer?
Chris, your mic's off.
Shall we turn this so he
Your
can see
mic's
me?
off, Chris. Your mic's off, Chris.
Thank you. Okay, so you, you right. Okay. Anyway, so what I was saying was this talk was partially inspired by an episode of The Hidden Brain with Shankar Vedantam, and he had a guest who was talking about how humans' ability to imagine potential dangers or to imagine what another human is thinking was was crucial to our survival, and how we were more likely to, in other words, there was evolutionary pressure if to be right about danger, but not wrong about a lack of danger, if that makes any sense. So if we see something that looks like a snake and we're like, no, it's probably a rope, but it was actually a snake, then we'd probably be dead. But if there's no harm whatsoever in thinking a rope is a snake, right? I'm not making any. Getting I'm getting tangled up in my own. But my point is, Zen practice has really helped in general with just stuff that therapy normally helps with. And so I can really easily see why some people might think Zen is like a substitute for therapy, or it's a complement to therapy, because so much of our psychology is just in stories, like, or some of our habits that need to be unlearned maybe. Like I'm prone to catastrophizing, for example. And um, yeah, if I was to sum up, I'd say studying Zen has made me a healthy skeptic of my mental activity. I would say I've got a lot farther to go on that point, but yeah, it's all these stories that I then respond to with more stories, and et cetera, et cetera, and so on and so on. So yeah. Mike, you had your hand up, but then you put it down. Did you want to still say something?
Well, everybody's been asking the questions I was going to ask, so I had to sit here and think about it. Great talk, Chris. When I was listening to your talk and everybody else, saying their part, I found that I sometimes believe that our thought process in our heads reflect how we view samsara and how we try to be anticipatory in dealing with what surprises. We don't really like surprises. We try to think, okay, this guy's going to be a jerk. I'm going to do this, and he's going to do this. I'm going to do this. It kind of removes the shock of that whole thing. And I think it really boils down to that our thoughts are great. I was watching the Olympics, and being an ex-rock climber, I was watching the climbing thing, and you see the climbers before they climb, they go through the physical motions in their brain, as to how they're going to grab a hold, how they're going to move their body before they start the climb. That's a good thought. That helps them get their brain focused into what they're doing and stuff. And then the thought of, my neighbor's a jerk. He's going to do this. Oh boy, I better be prepared. I'm going to do this. It's kind of the opposite thing. But I think it reflects, I don't want to say the word personality, but I don't know a better word right now. But it reflects how we view life. And some thoughts are good. They're necessary thoughts. You avoid danger. You avoid trouble. You avoid, conflict. Other thoughts boost your ego. Other thoughts frighten you. And so you think about them so you don't get so frightened if the scenario happens, even though most of the time it doesn't happen. I think thoughts are like, I think John was saying, it's like a movie theater. You get so engrossed in the movie that you forget you're looking at a movie. And what we need to do is when we get that way is walk out of the movie theater and just, walk out of that scene in our brain and say, look, all we got is now. So how does excuse me, Louise posted something funny, but I think that's kind of like what you were saying in your talk is that yeah, we do think that delusion is part of our life, but it's getting attached to it and getting caught up in the energy of it and stuff that we have to be careful about. So thank you for your talk. I really liked it.
Absolutely. That movie analogy, actually, I can remember hearing from Jane very, very early on in my studies at Beginner's Mind Zen Center. She was just, because I would be like very upset over something I was tripping out about. That's another great word, by the way, is being on a trip. And, if I was like on a trip during Zazen and I was getting very upset about it, Jane would tell me to remember. Am I muted again? Okay, no, not this time. Jane would tell me that whatever I'm imagining is just like a movie. It's not real. It can't hurt me, and it doesn't determine anything. Matt. Oops.
There we go. Had a little trouble. Thank you, Chris. I really enjoyed the talk, and I really appreciate your getting into the Book of Serenity and the koans. And if you ever encounter a neighbor with a tree and dumping things onto your property, it's a good opportunity for practice. It really is. And maybe you'll be ready for it with all of this preoccupation you've had.
I doubt it.
Anyway, I really liked where your talk went, which was ultimately to beginner's mind, which is the not knowing and reaching that point of intimacy, which I think is what beginner's mind refers to. Yesterday I was refilling some of our water bottles that we use for emergency water supply, and because we had gotten into them for something else, and I was pouring water from a pitcher into these relatively small openings, and in the past, I've been able to do it without spilling over the sides of the bottles that I'm filling. And I had the thought, I wonder if I can do it this time if I just, let go. I don't make the effort to get it in without spilling. And sure enough, there it went, right into the bottle, not a drop spilled. There was observation going on, but Matt wasn't really present. And it was a lovely experience. I really enjoyed it, and just thank you. It was just a wonderful talk and a wonderful way to end it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I just want to read what Luis put into the chat. There is a book called Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It talks about stress, anxiety, and that our mind wonders of the dangers and is not even that close, but we make our bodies experience the stress as if it was happening. Yup. Just like in the Matrix, the mind makes it real. Which, well, anyways, and John.
Hey there, sorry. But Sandy brought up something that is interesting that I wanted to ask about. And Sandy brought up that, when she's having these stories that, bring her anxiety and fears, that she combats those with stories that make her feel better. So my question is, are the stories really that Sandy's using to make herself feel better, which in that moment, obviously is making her feel better, but is that really the practice? Is creating stories that make you feel good any different than making up stories that make you feel frightened or otherwise? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's still
Yeah.
really making up stories, right?
Yeah, I would say strictly speaking, it's not the practice to substitute some stories for others, but that's, again, that doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. Just like if I tell myself a story that Zazen makes me feel better. Past experience has shown that, but even if I say it, it's still a story. Even this whole talk was just me like gabbing and gabbing and like Brad Warner says, Dharma talks are kind of like the candy you get after you visit the dentist. Sometimes they can help in one way or help in another way, or anyways, again, the stories are not bad. It Stories are helpful. Like if I catastrophize while I'm driving on the freeway about, what if, it's stories that make me follow at a safe distance from the driver in front of me, because I'm like, what if something comes across the road and that driver has to swerve to avoid it? I'll need to brake in time, right? If I didn't have that story, I might be inclined to drive even more crazy than I already do. But to see what Zen asks us to see, that's when we need to put the stories aside. And, I'm not going to say, I go out on a limb and say that seeing that more often is better than not. I wouldn't even necessarily say that. I just think it's natural the more we study our mind and the stories that are going on and the effort that we put into holding the stories up and keeping them going, right? The more we see that, I think the more we just get tired of it. And the, then the stories that aren't so helpful kind of fall away on their own, and the stories that are helpful will stay. And with fewer stories in general, then there's more chances to see or experience directly the life as Zen would have us experiencing it, if we could personify Zen as a entity, as it were. Mike.
Real quick statement in response to what Sandy and John were discussing. Science and medicine has proved placebos work just as good as the medication. So creating a story to battle something has its place, as long as you realize that both stories are empty. And if you're not capable of convincing yourself, and I'm real prone to this. I'm a pessimist. I'm prone to see the bad side. Well, it's like it's okay to tell yourself a good story as long as you remember that's just a story as well. But it's good because then it relieves the fear and stuff. And then when everything calms down, you can go back and think about it and go, okay, wait a minute, why was I thinking this? Why did I use this response and stuff? And I always think of that MASH TV show where they ran out of morphine and had all these people come in from the battlefront, and they had to just give them sugar pills and say, oh yeah, the drug's working fine. And it worked.
Mm.
Somebody said, well, that's not, but that's not the real medicine. It goes, what's the point? It worked. That's all that matters is it worked, So, again, stories, do have a place. Delusion does have its place as long as you remember that place.
Totes. Jane and Peter, would you like to say some capping phrases?
Yeah, I'd like to just say that thanks for your talk, and I like that you ended it by saying just become aware of it, and because that's a good way to place it in the right perspective immediately, and having stories just to get you through something. I understand because when I lived in Philadelphia, I wanted to walk home at night because it saved a lot of money. And so it was a long walk, like about an hour, but I went through South Philadelphia on the way to my apartment from the school. And as I left, I would carry a big umbrella in my hand as if it was a club. And I'd tell myself if anybody bothered me, I'd make such a fuss. They would get scared and take off. But of course, I knew that was a lie. But I was not gonna stop my walking, so I kept walking in. I would take really long strides to get through fast as I could. And somebody said to me one day, I saw you walking down through South Philadelphia with that umbrella. He said, and I'll tell you the truth, I wouldn't have messed with you. I was very belligerent walking down there just in case anybody bothered me. He said, well, I wouldn't bother you. So it took me about an hour to walk through there to my apartment. So sometimes I think that does help.
Oh, for
It's,
sure.
It allowed me to keep walking, which I like to do, walk from work to home in the evening. Anyway, but I enjoyed your talk, especially be aware of that it is a story, that you don't get lost in it. So
Thank you.
thank you. Do you want to say anything?
Alrighty then. Well,
Good job, Chris. Good job.
Thanks. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening and for contributing. And thank you for practicing with me. And let's do service.
Okay.